A very good evening to you and welcome to Corero, a platform where we help you make sense with pressing national issues. My name is Godwin Sunday. Nigeria's political landscape continues to evolve, and one of the most closely watched developments is the ongoing crisis within the People's Democratic Party, PDP. Now, once the dominant force in Nigerian politics, the party now finds itself grappling with internal divisions, factional leadership claims, and a series of court battles that have raised questions about its stability and future direction. These disputes go beyond party politics. In any democracy, a strong and organized opposition plays a critical role in holding the government accountable and offering alternative policy choices to citizens. Well, I haven't said that. When internal conflicts weaken that structures, the broader political system can also at this point be affected and also feel the impact. So, what exactly is driving the leadership tussle even within the People's Democratic Party? And will the party be able to come out of this quagmire, political quagmire if you like to use the word, in order for them to mitigate the whole political space and get Nigerians to further regain confidence in the People's Democratic Party, knowing that it was one time a dominant force within the political space to reckon with. Well, tonight I'm being joined by Barrister Salifu Oguche, and we will be looking at all of these issues together. Of course, he'll be helping us put these issues in perspective, looking at it from the legal angle of what has played out just this week, which we've seen that the Court of Appeal have squashed out quite a number of cases from the People's Democratic Party. What does this even mean for the party? All of this we'll try to put in perspective. Please go nowhere as we'll continue immediately after this break. Welcome back. Right now I'm being joined by Barrister Salifu Oguche, and we will be looking at a lot of issues on this table tonight. But first, it's a delight to have you join us again on Corero, Barrister.
Thank you, Mr. Godwin. It's always my pleasure.
Well, it's a very good time to talk about the People's Democratic Party right now because it's still fresh from the Court of Appeal. Although we understand that the party, a faction of the party, will be heading to the Supreme Court to be able to test some of the legality or otherwise of the judgment that has been even passed right now. But the People's Democratic Party is currently facing a very deep internal divisions from a legal standpoint right now. How serious is this crisis for Nigerian main opposition political party?
Once again, thank you for having me, Mr. Godwin. If you would remember very well, if you can recollect, precisely on the 17th of November, we were here and we predicted this same outcome. What just played out, we predicted it on this television on the 17th of November, a day after the Ibadan convention. And I, for one, am not surprised at the turnout of events. But in any case, it's unfortunate for the People's Democratic Party. It's also unfortunate for the Nigerian political landscape, because a very integral element of our political system, which is the most dominant and vibrant, as it were, opposition, is in deep crisis.
Well, Barrister, for the People's Democratic Party right now, we understand that they have majorly two factions, but then although some persons have said that they've also been a split in all of those factions, which is not yet confirmed. Again, with multiple factions laying claim to leadership within the party, what does the law actually even say, or what does the law recognize as the legitimate leadership structure? Because I'm asking this because a lot of courts right now are saying the party should go back and resolve their internal differences. But in the case of PDP, it tends to be a different a kettle of fish. So help us understand, what does the law actually recognize as the legitimate leadership structure?
You know, in legal parlance, there is this established position of the law that once there is a judgment of court, no matter how ridiculous it seems, it is binding and valid unless and until same it's set aside. As it stands today, the Anyang and Wiki's led faction of the People's Democratic Party is the official leadership of the PDP. Whether we like it or not, by the judgment of the Court of Appeal delivered yesterday, being 11th of March 2026, the Anyang-led faction is the official National Executive Committee recognized by the law as the organ of the People's Democratic Party that is responsible for its affairs as at today.
So as the court set aside the judgment from the Oyo State High Court?
Yes, that's the implication. You know, the judgment yesterday from the Court of Appeal was on all of the issues as they affect PDP. They were consolidated and a composite judgment was given. It upheld the judgment of the Federal High Court that nullified the Congress that was held in Ibadan on the 15th and 16th of November 2025 and upheld the leadership of the Anyang-led National Executive Committee of the People's Democratic Party. It nullified and recognized the Turaki's-led executive, which was elected at the Ibadan Convention. It, in fact, restrained INEC from recognizing that executive committee and all sort of positions. So as it stands, the legally recognizable leadership of the PDP is that of the Anyang faction.
All right, so we had a similar experience with that of the Labour Party, where we had the Nanadi Usman faction of the Labour Party and Aburi versus Aburi, and we saw what the position of the Supreme Court,
yes,
which was the party should go back and resolve its internal mechanism. As that changed, is the Supreme Court right now not even derailing from? Is the appeal court not derailing from the Supreme Court's judgment?
That is why Turaki's faction insists that they are heading to the Supreme Court. You know, the Supreme Court is the final court of the land. The Court of Appeal is, however, at liberty to take its own position just like it has taken, but ultimately the Supreme Court will give a final verdict with respect to that. As it stands today, the judgment of the Court of Appeal is the subsisting judgment of the court. The Anyang-led executive is the subsisting, legally recognizable National Executive Committee of the People's Democratic Party. It is not in our place to preempt what the Supreme Court would do, because the Supreme Court in certain circumstances is at liberty to deviate from its previous position. It depends on the facts placed before it. So we can't preempt, and it is not even good. It is not proper for us to sit here and begin to preempt the Supreme Court. But mind you, even at the Court of Appeal yesterday, with respect to other matters that borders on the PDP, the court directed parties to consider alternative resolution, to consider amicable settlement, because the court knows that ultimately, the court took cognizance of the fact that ultimately amicable resolution is in the best interest of not just the party, but also of democracy and the stability of the Nigerian political system. So ultimately, the PDP, the choice before the PDP as it stands today is either to seek the Supreme Court's position on the matter or to take the route of reconciliation.
On the first hand,
yes,
we've seen the a faction of the PDP, the Makidi's faction as it were, conducting a convention in Ibadan, and it came out successful for a lot of persons. Right now, the court is now asking the Wiki's faction to be recognized as the authentic leadership structure of the party. Now, putting all of this together, is the judiciary not weakening the party's People's Democratic Party, to be precise, ability to function effectively ahead of the 2027 elections?
Mr. Godwin, with all respect, I think it would be out of place and unfair to the judiciary for you to place the blame at this point at the doorstep of the judiciary.
But that's what it seems.
But why do I say that?
Yeah,
Who brought the matter before the judiciary in the first place?
No, because if there was a consensus candidate, that
no, let's look at it.
Okay, please help us.
Let's look at
help
it.
us.
The parties had issues. They told different parts. Some
the Turaki and the
some convened a convention at Ibadan and elected the Turaki convention. Before the convention, the Wike-led faction went to court to stop the convention. The Makinde-led faction went to Ibadan court and obtained an order urging them to go ahead with the convention. The parties were already at loggerheads, and they sought the intervention of the court as an arm of government that is constitutionally empowered to interpret laws and make pronouncement. What do you expect the court to do? To fold its hand and allow anarchy to prevail?
But the Anyanwu faction, the Turaki faction tend to enjoy more from the constitution of the party, looking at it, other than the Anyanwu faction. As a matter of contingency, a lot of people believe that the Anyanwu's tenure in office has also elapsed. The court is not looking at all of this. Rather, the court is looking at taking it retrospectively to the convention. I'm asking again at this point, regardless of who brings the case to the court, is the court not weakening the structure of the PDP? And can this be a deliberate attempt by the judicial arm of government to further weaken our democratical strength?
I am not holding brief for the judiciary.
All right, please.
But as a lawyer, I know too well, I know very, very well that courts decide matter based on facts placed before them. The courts don't manufacture evidence. The courts don't rely on rumor. The courts don't rely on hearsay. The court determines matters squarely on the basis of facts put before the court. And take cognizance of one fact. The Anyanwu-led faction and all of that had commenced this action as at that time their tenure was still running. So if their tenure had expired subsequently, that would not matter to the courts, because the action, what the court looks at is their position as at the time the matter was filed, and as at that time they were still the lawfully in place national executive of the People's Democratic Party. Without holding brief for them, I want to say with all sense of sincerity that the court in this case has done nothing fundamentally wrong. You may want to begrudge the court on the position, but again, how can you begrudge the court when you are not the court? You didn't see the facts that was placed before the court. You didn't see the evidence that was presented before the court and all of that. So it is the parties who have conducted themselves in relatively irresponsible manner, who have not been able to adhere to their own constitution, who have not been able to, as matured adults, as people that society look up to, who have not been able to adhere to rules that they give to themselves, that we should hold responsible for this.
But you know that posterity will tend to judge even what we are even doing right now, because what we tried in the tribunal of history by some of the precedents that we are setting right now. But then, because when you look at the legal precedents of a leadership within the People's Democratic Party and the way the disputes are handled, there are a lot of concerns right now, which is the way this crisis is being handled. Is it being handled academically, or is being handled practically to set a very good precedent for other political parties to follow suit? Taking it from the legal angle.
You know, what the law is always different from what it ought to be. The law is practical. academically, like you said, a whole lot of Nigerians would have wished that the Turaki-led air school is validated for the sake of stability and continuity. I also share that sentiment. But unfortunately, the courts are bound by facts. By the facts presented before my lords, in their wisdom, they felt otherwise. I don't think, frankly speaking, that this has deepened democracy. Rather, it has fractured democracy in a way. But unfortunately, the law is not about sentiment. The law is not about what we feel. It's not about what we think. It is what it is, which is the law itself. So the law in this circumstance remain as pronounced by the Court of Appeal. There is nothing we can do about it other than for the aggrieved parties to head to the Supreme Court.
All right. So let's even go to the electoral body, which is INEC.
INEC, yes.
Now, is there a possibility that the electoral body may refuse to recognize candidates from a faction if the dispute remains unresolved?
It goes without saying. As it stands now, the Turaki-led faction cannot present candidates to the Independent National Electoral because the judgment of the Court of Appeal restrained INEC from recognizing the Turaki-led faction. So, on what basis would they be presenting candidates to INEC? There is no basis. And let me tell you, the loophole there, it's, as it stands now, the Anyanwu-led executive committee, is their tenure still running? Can they be recognized as a legally in place National Executive Committee of the People's Democratic Party as to conduct primaries and present candidates? There are a lot of issues because, like you raised earlier, their tenure ought to have elapsed. And the PDP, represented by the Anyanwu faction, ought to have conducted congresses across the states and proceeded to convention and have a new leadership in place as at this time, preparatory to the 2027 general election. And all of that is in a very dicey and floating situation now. Sincerely, I think the PDP is in a very bad shape.
All right, very bad shape it is. But then it's not just the PDP. The Labour Party has its own fair share. Of course, we understand that we have 4 different factions even within the Labour Party. We have the Papa faction, we have the Aburi faction, the Nanadi Usman faction, we have the Ifagbemi, Professor Ifagbemi Awamaridi's faction. So making it 4 factions of the Labour Party. We also understand that the ADC just narrowly escaped from court where there was a lot of legal disputes trying to challenge the leadership structure of David Mark as not supposed to be the national chairman of the party, alongside with Rauf Aregbesola as the national secretary. Now, but then when you look at all of this put together, what does this say about our own multi-party system in terms of our multi-party systems across the board? Can we say at this point that the court is helping us to build or it's helping us to destroy?
Sincerely, I don't think democracy is faring too well under this present dispensation. Like you just highlighted, most of the parties are in crisis. What we cannot say with all certainty is whether these crises are orchestrated by the ruling party or it is the making of the parties themselves. The one thing we know for sure is the fact that most of these parties are in crisis. Like you also noted earlier, the ADC narrowly escaped the same fate, and I think we give it to the dexterity and maturity of the players. They remember those guys are masters of the rules. They were the ones that called the shots in PDP and in Nigeria to a larger extent for over 16 years, and that gives them some degree of understanding of the system, and that was how they were able to escape the landmines planted for them by those as they were. But the point to be made here is the fact that all of this do not mean well for democracy, for stability of our electoral system and all of that. And if nothing drastic is done, I think we are heading towards a one-party state,
all right,
which is not good for our democracy.
Typically, we've seen the court right now. A lot of people have accused the court of being the last electoral body, other than being the last hope of the common man, where almost all the members of the House of Representatives cases were tried and they were given some form of approval in competent court of laws. Then returning back to the minority political parties, we're seeing the dispute and we're seeing what the court holds as against popular opinions right now. Should Nigerians begin to depend on the courts to appoint leadership, political leadership for various political parties? Should this be the trajectory?
It's actually a sad narrative, because you have leaders who, for one reason or the other, most often on technical grounds, impose on Nigerians, especially at the legislative level. So many persons who are in the National Assembly and in our various state houses of assembly are not the true representatives of the people. You have cases whereby the people voted overwhelmingly for Mr. A, and for some very flimsy or even valid legal technicalities or legal grounds, you have them to change, and an individual who lost overwhelmingly at the poll is returned as their representative. First, it creates an issue of legitimacy, because the people actually did not vote for that individual. He doesn't owe them allegiance, and the people also don't see him as their representative. There is a gap between such representatives and the people. There is no synergy. There is no working together. And most often than not, we are having leaders who are not the representatives of the people, who don't feel they owe the people their mandate, their allegiance, and all of this are working against democracy. They are working against the growth and development of the electoral system.
All right. So basically, outside all of this legal tussle and also the various court shakes even across the board, do you see this People's Democratic Party coming out of this legal tussle strong, better, and more productive?
Without sounding pessimistic, I have serious doubts as to the ability of the People's Democratic Party to come out of all of this quagmire stronger and better, especially with respect to the forthcoming 2027 election. The PDP as it stands today, it's like, you to borrow your words, it's so weak, it's so factionalized, and the destruction of PDP is internal. Because if we must call a spade, some members of the PDP are working with the intention, well calculated intention, of holding the party down for the ruling party. And when you have a situation such as that, it becomes very difficult. Like, are you aware that between yesterday and today, about 6-7 lawmakers, about 2, 3, 4 reps members who've jumped ship. They have left the People's Democratic Party and they camped into the ADC. And you should expect more. What does it tell you? That the PDP is going down. And I look at the trustees of the People's Democratic Party yesterday talking about reconciliation, getting the party stronger, bringing the parties together and the party together, the warring factions together and all of that. And I asked myself one question. I said, what has become of us as Africans? Where were these elders all the while when these parties were warring? Where were they? Now, there is a victory, there is a defeat. Is it at this point that you begin to make peace? when it's practically becoming impossible for you to put the house together for the sake of presenting a formidable force in the 2027 general election? I have my doubts. The PDP might come back stronger, but certainly not before the 2027 general election.
It's too short a time.
It's too short a time. With all the landmines laid ahead of the PDP, it's too short a time for them to come out of all of it. Let me also remind you that the PDP suffered a major loss in the recently conducted local government area council election in the FCT. The FCT has been a stronghold of the PDP for over 2 decades. The PDP, notwithstanding change of leadership at every level, had the FCT as its stronghold. But in the last area council election, the PDP suffered huge loss, and you should expect more of such. Most especially now that the PDP is even going to have a peculiar case of which faction will present acceptable candidates to the Independent National Electoral Commission. So it's most likely that the PDP may not be on the ballot. Okay, it's already happening in Osun, forthcoming election. The PDP is not on the ballot. Are you aware? The PDP is not on the ballot. I have not taken my time to look at that of which other states is going in for election. Okay, Ekiti is also preparing for election, and one other state again.
Off-cycle elections.
Off-cycle elections. You understand? So it's most likely, like Osun for sure, INEC has released list of candidates and parties that are participating in the election. The PDP is off it. So you should expect more of that between now and the 2027 general election. It's not going to be Uhuru for the PDP. That I can tell you.
Well, right now, for many people within the People's Democratic Party, they said this barrister sounds like a prophet of doom, and there is no light at the end of the tunnel. But
they're just being realistic.
Well, of course, you've been practical about it, but then legally speaking, I believe you've been able to peruse the whole constitution of various political parties, I believe.
Very well.
So when, upon the perusal of these legal documents that's supposed to bind various political parties, are there no mechanisms that exist within the party constitution to even resolve these factional leadership disputes?
All parties have constitutions that make provisions for internal mechanisms. Let me tell you one thing for sure. In this particular republic, beginning from 1999, most of the constitutions of our political parties were duplications of the constitution written by the late Chief Bola Ige for the Alliance for Democracy and the People's Democratic Party. He wrote the constitution because they first formed the People's Democratic Party, which he was a member. He wrote the constitution for PDP, and subsequently, when they felt that the PDP was not going to serve their interests, they formed the Alliance for Democracy. He also wrote the constitution for AD, and subsequent parties just adapt that same constitution. So all parties, virtually all parties in Nigeria, have laid down, established internal procedure mechanism for addressing discontent, dissent. And in this situation, that is why I called out the Board of Trustees of the PDP a while ago. At this point, the crisis involved members of the National Executive Committee and the National Working Committee of the party themselves, which incidentally were about the highest organ of the party that should have been responsible for reconciling or addressing grievances. The only party, the only body that was ahead of these two bodies was the Board of Trustees. And the Board of Trustees sat down for too long and did nothing until yesterday. They are calling for reconciliation. I think it is an unfortunate situation, but the internal mechanism as provided by the PDP constitution failed the parties because the actors involved were persons who should have been involved in reconciliation if other persons were at war.
So you're saying that the actors involved failed, not the party's constitution that failed itself.
What is a constitution? It is a document. It is human beings that speak life to the constitution. And who are the human beings in these circumstances? The political actors, members of the national.
But the human
committee.
beings have come out in convention to also select who they want.
Part of the human being.
You not say a part of the human beings. Quite a number of states were represented.
Very well.
Majority of the governors that were then in People's Democratic Party were also represented and also were part of that process.
Very well.
The likes of Mufwang and the rest of them, Lawal Dawuda and the rest of them were part of that convention.
Very well.
All of a sudden, the court right now is trying to make the convention to become an unpopular convention, making it to be a convention that is legally void and null. It's not using the word void ab initio.
Yes.
For whatever reason. As it stands, we've said that it's based on the facts that have been submitted to the court. But then I'm asking, at this point, if the constitution have a way of the letters leave, and of course you said people, we need the board of trustees and other key players to be able to implement all of this, but then there is a section in the constitution that allows them to go back and do a convention and reconvene and bring back elected officials. Now the court is saying, if 2/3 of the people that came out for that convention gave valid votes, we should not recognize them because that convention was void ab initio because Ayahu said so. So I'm trying to understand all of this. Is the court in Nigeria trying to divide the minority political party, because that is what it seems even for the Labour Party? Are the court in Nigeria deliberately trying to even create some form of cracks and rancor within the minority political parties?
Mr. Godwin, while you were making this analysis, something came to my mind. It's even on a matter that I worked on recently. There is a well-established, very prosaic, elaborate dictum of a British law lord, Lord Denning, MR, that says when an action is bad or it is void ab initio, it is incurably bad, and there is nothing the law can do about it but to have it set aside, because you can't put something on nothing and expect it to stand. It will collapse. As much as sentimentally as an individual, I would have wished that the Turaki school is validated, because like you rightly posited, it had the participation of the majority of the actors in PDP as at then. But like I said earlier, landmines were laid for that faction and for the convention. What are the landmines? A faction, the Anyanwu-led faction, went to court and obtained an injunction restraining the party.
Almost 2 days after to the convention, we saw the Seyi Makinde's faction also going to court to get also a similar injunction to allow
let me tell you where the confusion is. The Anyanwu faction got their injunction from the Federal High Court. The Seyi Makinde faction went to the Anyanwu faction, got their injunction. There were 2 injunctions. They got their injunction earlier in time. Then the Seyi Makinde faction went to an Oyo State court and also got an order okaying the convention. Is it not so? Now, the Oyo State High Court and the Federal High Court are courts of coordinate jurisdiction. The Oyo State High Court cannot vacate or overturn the judgment of the Federal High Court. You understand? It cannot. And since it cannot vacate that judgment, which was already there before its own pronouncement, this has not been vacated. In the eye of the law, it is subsisting. Yours says, okay, you can go ahead. Yours did not make any...
It's of coordinate jurisdiction.
It's of coordinate jurisdiction. But this was first in time. It says, don't do. It restrained the party, it restrained INEC from recognizing, from participating and all of that. This was affirmative. You can go ahead and do. Now the Court of Appeal, in its own wisdom, says there is another restraining you, because one legal principle that is established in our legal jurisprudence is the fact that no matter how frivolous and flimsy you think an order of court is, it is binding until set aside. So that having been said, the Court of Appeal has upheld the judgment of the Federal High Court and has on that ground nullified the Ibadan Convention. It actually doesn't augur well for our democracy. It is stifling democracy, it is stifling opposition, just like you also noted with respect to the Labour Party and all of that. But unfortunately, that is where we are now. That is the political and legal reality. Unless, like in the case of Labour Party, I think the Supreme Court has laid the matter to rest.
And made it more complex.
How?
But the Supreme Court made it more complex for the Labour Party. It said go back and...
But it's
an internal party. The Supreme Court did not outrightly came out to recognize the Nadi Sambo's faction. Usman, I beg your pardon.
Usman faction. But the faction took up the leadership.
The faction took up at the stakeholders meeting at Transcorp Hotel in Abuja, and the likes of Peter Obi moved from that meeting, stakeholders meeting as it were, to the INEC office to compel INEC to uphold and recognize the judgment of the Nadi Usman's faction. And we saw what played out. Aburi's faction also were saying that the Nadi Usman's faction does not have the power to convene a NEC and stakeholders meeting. That it is the sole responsibility and sole prerogative of the ESCOs to be able to put all of that together. We saw what played out in all of those settings. Now, for a lot of persons within the Labour Party, they'll say that the Labour Party's case, the Supreme Court helped the Labour Party to be more divided and helped to expand the cracks within the Labour Party. But I'm not holding brief for the Labour Party right now. I'm just saying, with this situation playing out right now, where the Supreme Court or the courts in itself is saying that this meeting, this convention was widely attended, widely recognized. A few individuals within the political party went ahead to get an injunction from the Federal High Court to stop this convention. Of course, whether or not, but then the party constitution supersede what was expected. Now, if we're supposed to go by the Supreme Court's rulings on Labour Party, that is, the party is supposed to go back and resolve in its entire internal affairs. Are we saying right now that the whole ruling by the court, the Federal High Court right now, and the injunction being gotten and what is being upheld by the Court of Appeal is the right step in the right direction? Not trying to even
it's not actually good for our democracy. It's not good for the party, but it is what it is. It is the law as it stands today. Ordinarily, if you ask the average member of the People's Democratic Party and the average Nigerian, they will want a stable PDP. They would want the Turaki faction to continue so that people can have alternative platform to vie for political offices. Because as it stands today, it's also a sad narrative that when the court is called upon to determine a matter as to speak direction to a particular situation, it throws it back to the people to go and reconcile, to go and settle as internal affairs. If the people were able to do that in the first place, they wouldn't have submitted the matter for the determination of the courts. So it doesn't augur well for our democracy. I think democracy is the loser here, and the Nigerian people. So
at this point, will you recommend political negotiation, internal arbitration, or judicial intervention?
All of that
as the best way out of the people's democratic crisis?
All of that failed in the first place. That is why they went to court.
But then, as it stands, what will be your recommendation? Political negotiation, internal arbitration, or judicial intervention?
No, judicial intervention. You know, most often than not, judicial intervention in cases that has to do with human relationship doesn't solve problems. Because once you have a loser and you have a winner, the battle may have ended in the courtroom, but it continues on the field. So the best way out of this political logjam is reconciliation. And I think the effort being engineered by the Board of Trustees is the right step in the right direction, though it is belated, if you ask me.
All right. So in your view, if this crisis persists, what does it mean for the future of opposition politics and democratic balance in Nigeria?
Pragmatically speaking, I think Nigerians should wake up from their political slumber, adopt some newer political parties that are bereft of crisis, that are crisis-free. We have a number of political crises that have not been infected by this crisis, that have been crisis syndrome, that are relatively crisis-free. So Nigerians should dust up such political parties and begin to put up their political activities on the platform of such parties. Because as it stands today, the PDP and the Labour Party, which were supposed to be the dominant opposition parties in this present republic, have been infected with some unresolvable crisis. So it is in the best interest of democracy and the Nigerian political space that we should seek alternative political platform that are not crisis infected.
But not trying to mock the People's Democratic Party, but then are there lessons for other political parties in Nigeria to even learn from the current turmoil in the People's Democratic Party right now?
Definitely. Right, there are legions of lessons. Legion of lessons. Parties should always ensure that their affairs are conducted in strict accordance to their own rules. Remember, the PDP crisis has been evolving. Remember how they lost the entire seats won by them in Zamfara? And what my lord, the late Justice Oshimana then said was that the PDP had failed to adhere to rules that it made for its own self, which boils down to internal democracy and adherence to your own party's constitution. Parties should learn to do that. Then again, there is need for the Nigerian political class to know that power and politics should be organized in such a way that losers should affairs should be conducted fairly and transparently in such a way that losers should magnanimously accept defeat, and winners should also be magnanimous in victory. So that parties should conduct themselves responsibly, peacefully, and with the greater interest of the society, the party, the society, and the nation at heart. Politicians should desist from this attitude of pulling down the system when it doesn't work in their favor. I think there are a lot of lessons inherent in this PDP crisis for all the political actors within the Nigerian political space.
I believe a lot of politicians right now watching us right now will be able to take one or two from what you've said. But it's understood. I want to say thank you so much, Barrister Salifu, for finding out time to be with us here on Covero.
It's always my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Well, viewers, how far we can go tonight on the show. Do not forget that you can leave your thoughts, you can leave your comments on our various social media handle currently showing on your screen. And you can also download the Rapid TV app from your Android and iOS devices to keep track of our broadcast. My name is Godwin Sunday. Always remember that peace and unity are the pathways to progress. Do enjoy the rest of your night rest. Bye for now.